Greetings, retro lover. This is Ethan, aka the Ghost Mall. I produce retrowave music, that is, music inspired in particular by the 1980s and the early 1990s. And today I wanted to talk with you about one of the most important tools that we have as music producers or as recording engineers to shape our sound. And that is specifically equalization, or EQ. Now, if you've been following the Ghost Mall's channel for any length of time, you probably already know that I produce almost all of my music with the Ghost Mall in the box. And what that means is that instead of using a bunch of external hardware, whether they be instruments or effects units or a recording console or the like, I do almost all of my work here inside of my computer using digital audio workstation software, or a DAW, and lots of what are called plugins. Now, some of those plugins are virtual instruments, and many of them are virtual effects units that help to shape and tailor the sound. And it's really convenient, and it's a wonderful and very modern way to make music. And yet, it is still possible with the wide range of virtual instruments and virtual effects out there to create retro-sounding music in this fashion, because there are a lot of plugins that are modeled on old hardware. So, in particular, I wanted to run through today a list of 5 of my very favorite virtual EQ plugins that I use constantly when mixing and mastering my music for the Ghost Mall. As I said, EQ is really, after we've produced a song and written it and hopefully arranged it well, EQ is just about the most important tool that we have to shape our sound. I'd say that after that, it's probably compression. And then we can go on to talk about spatial effects and time effects and things like chorus and delays and reverbs. But really, when it comes to shaping and molding our sound, equalization is really vital. So I'm going to share with you, as I said, my very favorite top 5 EQ plugins for mixing my own music. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what distinguishes one from the other. You might think, well, it's an EQ. All EQs, boost and cut certain frequencies. But really, they all have their own personality. Now, some of these are EQs that I use primarily to give character to a sound and add a sort of retro vibe to a sound, or to capture the sound of some piece of retro hardware. And others of these are very modern and sort of transparent EQs that have special features that were not something you could accomplish with hardware years ago, but that you can easily accomplish in the virtual realm today. So let's go ahead and dive in. And I'm actually going to start, before giving you my top 5, with a runner-up. And this is to make kind of a point about digital recording today. So my runner-up in this list of my favorite EQ plugins is just a stock EQ, whatever comes stock in the DAW that you use. So I've used a variety of DAWs in my recording career. My previous main DAW was Cakewalk Sonar, and now I use this program, Presonus Studio One, as my main recording software. I also use Propellerhead Reason in tandem with Studio One, and I've used many other programs like Logic and Pro Tools and the like. But every one of those packages of software comes with many stock plugins, and probably the most important of which is a stock EQ. And in my experience, they've all been really great. So right here you have the Pro EQ, which comes stock with Studio One. Cakewalk had a great one in Sonar, and the SSL style console EQ in Reason is also wonderful. But for the most part, you're going to be able to accomplish whatever you need to with a good stock EQ. So the Pro EQ here has a great analyzer on the top. It has low cut and high cut filters, as well as 5 other bands. And let me just play you a little bit through this and adjust this so you can see just, what you can do with a good old stock EQ. So the material that I have here today are some stems, some individual dry tracks from a single from the Ghost Mall called Forget the Sunset. And if you like what you hear here, I'll be sure to put a link into the description of the video so that you could download that song if you're interested. But these are just the dry, completely unprocessed tracks, and it's not the full arrangement. It's just a few that I could work with here. But here, go ahead and take a listen to the chorus here. You'll hear it's very dry.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset and the way you held me close then. Maybe we will both regret the sunset, since I'm not the one you've chosen.
So yeah, that's just the vocals, some percussion, the bass, and some accompanying parts there. So let's go ahead and solo up this loop here, which was kind of a starting place for this arrangement that I built things around. And let's listen to it first with no processing, and then I'm going to show you what this EQ could do to sort of alter this sound a bit. So it's kind of a percussion ensemble. It has a kick and a snare and some like congas and stuff in there. So let's go ahead and activate this plugin now. And you'll see the analyzer come to life here. You can actually change the way that it visualizes what's going on, which is really cool. Let's start by pulling in a low cut filter here. You can change the slope of this from a very smooth 6 dB per octave all the way to very steep 48 dB per octave. 12 is a good starting place. And sometimes this allows you to tighten up the low end by cutting out the super sub frequencies and just accentuating the stuff you really want. Yeah, so to my ear, just having that at a 24 decibel per octave slope down low at 27 hertz, it cuts out some of the super sub lows and it accentuates the good low end, the punchy low end of the kick. Let's see what else we can do here. Let's come up here to the high filter, and right now it is set as a shelf instead of a peaking filter. It can be set as a peak filter like the others, but this is a top shelf, so let's mess with that. Now you can adjust these knobs, of course, if you so choose. But you can also just grab the node and move it about. So let's do that. That's nice. That brings out the hi-hats a little bit and adds a little bit of air around everything. Yeah, that sounds really good. Maybe let's grab another mid-band and see what we can do with that. Now, I'm grabbing it with the mouse, and you can, increase the gain, decrease the gain, and using the scroll wheel, you can change the Q factor and make it either really broad or really narrow band. I often find that there's something in the low mid-range around anywhere between 3 and 500 hertz that with percussion can create a bit of boxiness, so I'm trying to take some of that out here. That kind of makes the snare poke through a little better. So yeah, so I really didn't intend this to be a course on how to EQ. Rather, I wanted to show you some of my favorite EQs and their applications. But as you can see, pretty much all the tools that you need to really shape a sound are right here in this 5-band plus high and low pass filter EQ with the built-in analyzer. This is just stock, and there are many cases where I'll just pull this up as my starting place if I need to EQ something, and many times I'm totally satisfied. So yeah, if you have a stock EQ and you either haven't investigated it or really learned how to use it yet in your DAW, I highly suggest going and just trying it on a few records and seeing, because I bet a lot of the time you're going to be happy with what you're able to do with it. Okay, but moving on to my personal top 5 EQ plugins, we're going to start with number 5, and this is a plugin from Waves called the Manny Marroquin EQ. Now, Manny Marroquin is a very well-known mix engineer, very successful. He's mixed a bunch of great modern records that I love, and he has a series of 5 or 6 plugins with Waves. There's an EQ, a reverb, a delay, and some like multi-band dynamics plugins as well. I also believe he has a distortion plugin, which is pretty neat. But in any case, this is the EQ, and as you'll see here, this is quite different from the previous one. To begin with, it doesn't have an analyzer. It just has knobs to adjust the gain. It doesn't have a variable Q, nor does it have continuous selection for the frequencies. This is a fixed frequency EQ. So for example, if you come down here to frequency 1 band, you can choose 50 hertz, 110 hertz, 140, and so on. And these are fixed bands that have been determined by the manufacturer and the designers of the plugin. In frequency 2, you've got sort of the low mids, 400 or 320, etc. High mids, and then up here on the high band, this is kind of an interesting and unique feature of this EQ that it allows you to select even in the sort of supersonic by human standards hearing area, 20K, 25K as well. And this one you can switch from a peak filter to a shelf. So when would I normally use this? Well, this is a good moment to talk about the difference between subtractive and additive EQ. And if you aren't familiar with those terms, they really are what they sound like. So when we say subtractive EQ, we're talking simply about finding frequencies that we feel like there's too much of in a particular element that might be masking something else in the mix, and that we really need to take away some of because it's detracting or creating an imbalance in our mix. Maybe it's something that is just an unflattering frequency in the sound, so we would just go ahead and find that frequency that we didn't like, and we would take some of it out. That is subtractive EQ. Additive is, of course, the opposite. We add and boost frequencies when we really want to accentuate something, either because it's lacking and a sound needs more of it, or perhaps we just want to accentuate a particular harmonic or something that exists in that range on a particular instrument. So for subtractive EQ, the general rule of thumb, and I do subscribe to this for the most part, is that it's advisable to use narrow bands, and for boosting to use broader bands, and that produces often a more natural kind of sound. You don't want to cut out too much of a sound when you're, dipping something out. If you go with a really wide Q or bandwidth there, you can kind of gut a sound very easily. Now, rules are made to be broken, and there are going to be times when we do the opposite of that. But as a general rule, that's kind of a nice heuristic for doing subtractive versus additive EQ. And so this is an EQ I like to use often for adding. It has quite a bit of character, and it's really smooth, especially this top band here. If you want to add some air, this is one of my go-to plugins for adding air to things because it really just sounds open and really clear. You can boost a lot without it sounding harsh. So yeah, so I put this on the same loop here, and let's play that back, and I'm going to start EQing a bit here. Same kind of idea there as before, a little high pass. Let's open up the top end with a shelf here. Let's try the really high band at 25K. That really sounds really nice there. Let's see if we can find some good low end to boost. Let's try this low 50 hertz band. Yeah, that definitely adds some weight to the kick. Often in the 5 to 7K range, I find can be a nice place to boost for a snare, a little bit of crack on the snare. You can overdo it though, so let's A/B that. Without. With. Might be a little much, but that's a good band there. That 5K would be nice for that. So yeah, so this is the Manny M EQ from Waves. You can either get it in their bundle of 6 plugins from Manny or just on its own. And again, I really like it for additive kinds of things. It's really dead simple because the bands are already pre-selected. They're voiced really nicely. It's very musical. And yeah, so this is one that you might consider. It's not retro per se, but it does add a nice character to the sound. All right, so moving on to now a truly retro hardware inspired, or I should say kind of a recreation of retro hardware, another plugin from Waves this time. This is the Puigtec, one of 2 EQs in this bundle called the Puigtec EQs. Now, the reason they're named that is because these are based on the much beloved vintage studio rack mount EQs called Puigtecs. And these particular emulations are based on a couple of actual units owned by the famous mix engineer Jack Joseph Puig. So Puig plus Puigtec, you have Puigtec. And yeah, these are really cool, very retro and authentic sounding. They definitely are unique. Let me explain a little bit about how a Puigtec works. So what's unique about a Puigtec is that you are able to select bands, much like in the last EQ I showed you. They're fixed bands. And then what you can do is boost that band while at the same time attenuating it. That's what boost and attend here meets. So you might be asking yourself, why on earth would you be boosting a frequency that you like and reducing it at the same time? But that's not exactly what happens. So sometimes this is called a push-pull EQ. And what happens is that a sort of wide band will be boosted at the area you've chosen, like say 60 hertz here, for example. And when you turn up the attenuation control, as you increase it, it sort of pushes down the adjacent frequencies on the top and the bottom, right to either side. And what that does is it has the effect of heightening and tightening and accentuating the frequency that you have chosen to boost. Now, it takes a little bit of getting used to. It's a bit of a learning curve compared to more traditional kinds of EQ, but it's a very powerful tool. And a lot of mix engineers love to use this model here. This is the EQP1A. I know that's a mouthful, but the EQP1A on their mix bus, for example, because this allows you to boost the low end and the high end of your mix and sort of create that smiley face EQ curve if you want. The other model here is the, this is sort of for the mid-range. It's the MEQ5. And since that is not what's in the wheelhouse of the other model, there's a second model here for just boosting and attenuating a bit in the mid-range. All right, so what I've done already is I've kind of EQ'd one of the source sounds here, and I will walk you through the settings I'm using and why I chose it, and you can hear sort of the effect of the boost and attenuation working in tandem. So what I put this on here is the kick. This is from a TR-707, Roland TR-707 drum machine. Let's listen to it dry. That's a wonderful classic drum machine sound, but it's pretty small and pretty timid right now. So let me put in my EQ and you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so what have I done here? Well, I swept through the bands here and I settled on 60 hertz on the low frequency. That's usually a nice place to boost to accentuate a kick. Boosted it quite a bit to 7, and then I'm also attenuating. So let me reset these, and you can hear what happens here. And I'm going to boost in the low end. So you definitely get more mass down there, but to my ear, it's a little bit flabby, it's a little bit indistinct. So now what you do is you roll in the attenuation, and you're going to hear that frequency band sort of tighten up. Yeah, it just makes it more focused, and that's really the idea or the attractive feature of these Puigtecs. Let's come over here to the high frequency. Now, you see 3, 4, 5, 8. These are kilohertz, so 8K, for example, is what I'd settled on here, all the way up to 16K. And that is complemented by this attenuation select at 5, 10, or 20K. If you're wondering what this is over here, this is an interesting feature on the Waves plugin, which emulates a little bit of the electrical noise of the original units. Often I turn this effect off on many of the Waves plugins in which it's included because it can be distracting, but it's pretty subtle on this one. And so, yeah, so what did I do next? Well, I wanted to add a little presence to the kick as well, so I went with the 8K band here and boosted and attenuated. So let me go ahead and take these away and roll them back in, and you can hear the difference it makes. So that's got a little more of that 8K sort of up here in your face kind of a sound, but let's focus it as well by turning up the attenuation. Yeah, okay, again, EQ off, and then I'll bring it back in from bypass, and you can hear the difference. It really makes a world of difference, and as you can see over here on the gain control, I have level compensated this as best I could, so because I'm boosting bands here, I needed to turn the output down, but it's not really just increasing level at all. It's just transforming the sound in a really musical way. So let's really quickly look at the other Puigtec from the Waves set here. This is the mid-range one. Now, I've used this on the snare, which is also from the TR-707. Let's listen to it with no processing. Let's go to the chorus where it's a little busier. Again, another classic 80s drum machine sound, but it needs a lot of love. So let's bring in the EQ and hear that. A little livelier, has a little more weight to it. So what did I do here? Well, on this band, I chose 200 hertz, which is as low as it goes on the MEQ5, because again, it's a as you see here, mid-range equalizer. But that's a good spot to kind of add some fundamental frequencies to the snare. Adjacent to that, so that was the peak filter. Adjacent to that, it says dip. And what I've done is I've just moved from 200 to 300 hertz and attenuated there. Again, that's the range where sometimes things get a little boxy and a little cardboard sounding. And so the combination of the two is really nice. So let me take those away and I'll add them in, and you can hear the difference that makes. So boosting the lows. Yeah, that's great. And then let's tighten it up a bit by taking away some of the low mid-range in the 300 range. That sounds good. And then there's another filter here, another peak filter. So I set that for 5K, which again, I showed you on another EQ, is a really good place to add a little presence to a snare. And I didn't add much, so let's take that away and bring it back in. Here, let me turn it up high and accentuate it. You can hear what would happen. There's that snap. Now that's clearly too much. All right, so one more time bypassed. Activated. It just really shapes things out a lot better. All right, so those are the Puigtec EQs from Waves, the EQ-P1A and the MEQ5. Again, they are based off of the old Puigtec hardware. Really retro, really versatile, really musical. Have a bit of a learning curve, but they do their thing. It's a very special thing, and they do it really well. Okay, now coming in at number 3 on my list of favorite EQ plugins is really shifting gears here. So we went from a couple of more hardware style and maybe sort of characterful EQ plugins from Waves to, I'm going to show you something super modern and super interesting here. So this plugin is called frei. It comes from Sonible. And what it is actually, it's a combination of 3 separate EQ plugins in one. What Sonible have done here with frei is to combine some of their most popular plugins. They're all EQs, but they all do very different things to the sound. And they've taken the 3 and put them into one. So up here we have the Smart EQ, then the Proximity EQ, and then the Entropy EQ. You can get all of these separately as individual plugins, or you can just get frei and combine them, and then you can use them in tandem, all 3 at once on different bands of the instrument that you're treating with the plugin. Okay, so what do these do? In a nutshell, and this is to the best of my ability to explain it, Smart EQ has these filters. You know, it's got a high pass, low pass, and 5 filters in the middle. What really distinguishes it is this magic wand here. And what that does is it allows you to hone in on areas with a certain band. And what Smart EQ will do is listen to the sound, and it will analyze it. And as you use that band, it's going to reduce inharmonic content and accentuate harmonic content, essentially sort of making sure that what you are hearing is more in line with the notes that are being played. It's kind of hard to explain, so I'll go ahead and just show you. And then after that, I'll move on and show you the proximity and the entropy EQs. So the source we have here is the bass for this song. It's a classic Korg Poly 6 stereo bass patch, one of the most famous retro synth basses. All right, so what you do here with the Smart EQ is, let's choose a band. Let's boost it up here. And I'm going to clear that. You turn on and off the magic wand. You can just use these bands as conventional EQ bands if you like, but if you activate the magic wand and then press this is supposed to be like a record button, it's going to listen to the sound and watch what happens. Okay, I had a bit of a malfunction there. Let's try that again. So again, what you do is on the Smart EQ page, you activate a band with the magic wand, and then you start to play audio through it and press this record button. You'll see this little pause light blinking. And right now what it's doing is it's learning, essentially, hence the Smart EQ moniker. It's taking in the information. Now watch, I'm boosting here, but what you're going to see is a cut. And what that represents is that the EQ has found where it thinks the harmonic and inharmonic content of the sound is, and it's boosting and cutting accordingly. Let's narrow up the EQ a bit. So potentially what it's finding there is a bit of resonance in the low mids that don't correspond to harmonics of the notes being played. It's really interesting. And again, as with the Puigtec, it takes a bit of getting used to. It's a bit of a learning curve. But the basic idea is once you have run the sound through the Smart EQ and it's had a chance to learn, as you boost, you're boosting the consonant parts of the sound. And as you cut, you're boosting the sort of discordant, if you want, or just sort of the inharmonic parts of the sound. And you can do both. You can also, again, use a node as a regular old EQ node, adjust the Q factor, etc. So it functions quite well as a conventional EQ as well, even though it doesn't have an analyzer. But the Smart EQ functionality is kind of unique and definitely worth experimenting with. I've heard it on some of my other mixes on some other sources really kind of make things just sound more pleasant, more natural, if you will. Now let's move on to the proximity EQ. In essence, what this is meant to do is just what the name says. It helps sources sound either closer to or further away from the listener. And this is most easily shown by coming down here to the global controls. You have a section of master controls for the Smart EQ, for proximity, and for entropy. And I'm just going to use the global proximity knob here, and you can hear what happens. Turning it up. Kind of gets more in your face. Turning it down. Now, this is particularly useful if you have an instrument that's not like a DI recording or a virtual instrument recording, but something that was recorded in an actual space. Perhaps you recorded it in a room and you just got too much of the room sound in there. You can boost this up and sort of bring that closer to the listener, or vice versa. If things seem really dry, you can sort of go this way and accentuate the room sound. But I like it to use on a per band basis to really bring certain frequencies up into the listener's face, especially even in the low end, which can be kind of hard to do. Here we go. Let me turn that up and accentuate it. Let's bypass. Sounds pretty good. Let's find another spot that can be really good to do this in is in the sometimes 600 hertz to 1K region on a bass. There can be some of the second order harmonics that can really help it cut through. So let's look for some of that. That sounds pretty good. Bypass. Activated. Yeah, that really brings sort of a presence to that particular area that we're boosting there. So proximity EQ can be really interesting to also play around with. And lastly, there is the entropy module here in frei raum. And what this is really meant for is to take certain frequency ranges and accentuate it's not exactly the attack and the sustain, but it is kind of like that. It's almost like a band dependent transient designer. So let me again use the master controls here to demonstrate this. Turning up the master control entropy. And what you're hearing is mostly attack, right? Very plucky. Reversing that. You're hearing mostly sustain. In fact, it almost sounds as if on the synthesizer, the attack time had been rolled up on the ADSR, and you're hearing a sort of fade in on the sound. So again, what you can do is find bands where you really want things to punch through and boost those bands up on the entropy. Find another here. All right, let's bypass that. Activated. And you can really make things punchier by accentuating the very attack of the signal, but in a certain frequency range or frequency ranges. All right, so that is frei raum from Sonible. 3 EQs in one, all of them very modern and very unique. All three do something that I don't know a whole lot of other processors that do these types of things, especially on a band-dependent basis. Maybe you could find plugins that accentuate these types of things globally, but to be able to do it on a certain frequency band is really cool. So I highly recommend frei raum if you're interested in experimenting more with your sounds, or if you have some really specific issues that you want to be able to tackle and other tools aren't getting it done, then frei raum or any of these individual EQs from Sonible, Smart EQ, Proximity EQ, and Entropy EQ, they might be able to help you out. All right, well, we are in my top 2 favorite EQ plugins, but with number 2, I have to admit I'm probably cheating quite a bit here. So let me pull it up and tell you about it. This is Slate's Virtual Mix Rat from Slate Digital. That's Stephen Slate's company. They make some of the most incredible virtual analog plugins in the whole world, and they have a whole suite called their Everything Bundle, and it's a monthly bundle. It includes not just this VMR, which means virtual mix rack here, but virtual tape emulation, mastering processing, a reverb, which is really wonderful. But what VMR is, it's a virtual mix rack, as you can see, and it has a lot of modules, not just EQs. It has compressors, it has preamps, it has console emulation, etc., etc. But what I wanted to show you were the EQs in particular, which come with the Slate Digital VMR. Now, let me really quickly walk you through what each of one of these is. And some of these are very truly modeled on wonderful retro hardware. And some of them are new and designed by Slate, but really have a sort of retro character to them. So the first module here is the FGS, which is based on the EQ in an SSL 4K console. Very well loved, very, used ubiquitously throughout the last several decades since the 1980s on countless hit records. Just a few bands, but it's super versatile. Then we have the FGN here, this blue one, which is based on a Neve style EQ. Then the FGA, which is the newest edition, and that is based on an API style EQ. All of these are sort of retro or vintage hardware EQs in the analog realm. Then we come to the Custom Series EQ and the Custom Series Lift. These are designed by Slate, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them later, but I use these all the time. And then lastly, over here, we have Air EQs Earth and Air, which are meant for boosting the low end and the top end, or boosting or cutting the low end and the top end, respectively. So let's come back to the FGS. I'm going to concentrate mostly on these first 3 because they are the more retro of the bunch. But all of these do different things. I'd say that the FGS is very powerful. It's a very, very powerful EQ. When you sweep through one of these bands, you really hear it. The N is often used to boost mid-range in a very musical and pleasing way. Also, it's very potent. The FGA has fixed bands and its own sort of unique sound, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the features that make the plug-in version cool. Then the Custom Series EQ, I think this was really designed as a mastering EQ. It has fixed bands and only a few of them. They're really broad and very, very musical, but I use it on a lot of sources. The Custom Series Lift is sort of a parallel processing kind of thing with a low band and a high band and 2 voicings possible for each. And I already described the Air EQ modules here and what they do. So best way to talk about this, or rather understand them better, is to listen. So I'm going to bypass the whole thing. And this is here's the sound source. This is the electric piano. It's a Yamaha DX7 electric piano, classic 80s synth sound. So let's work with the FGS and see what we can accomplish on this sound. First, I want to bring in some good low end here. Let's turn this to a bell instead of a shelf. You can kind of hear that you can crank that. I've got that up at 15 dB and it never sounds really weird. Now, I probably wouldn't use that in the mix that way, but you can crank these knobs, and people like Chris Lord Alge really do it in the real analog world all the time. Let's high pass that a bit. Let's add a little bit of top here on a shelf. Bypass. Activate. Obviously, we're adding some level there, but you can hear how you can really shape the sound. And you have a lot of room here with these knobs to really go pretty far on some of these. The FGS is in my mix template, and one of my first EQs on any source to sort of first give it a little bit of retro character, and then I often use this for subtractive EQ on this low mid filter, or if there's some harshness, just cutting out what needs to go first. I often use the FGN more for boosting. Now, on the hardware units, if I'm not mistaken, these were fixed frequency bands, but as you can see here, they're continuous. So these two mid filters are identical. So you can sort of, let's say you wanted to boost both at 1K and again way up here at 5K, you could do that. But it also has a few unique features to it. And particularly, I love this drive. And what that does is if you activate it and turn the red knob, it brings in some really nice harmonic saturation based on the hardware. So let's listen to that. It's subtle, but it actually can, on certain sources, kind of almost sound like distortion. And I like to use this on basses a lot, actually. I'll sort of use this to find that mid area in the bass and add some harmonic saturation to it as well. So let's see what we can do on this piano. Add the top shelf here. You can tell that's really, really powerful. A little bit goes a long way with this. So that's the FGN. I really like that, especially for adding. And the FGS for both subtractive and additive. It's just really a versatile all-around EQ. The FGA is the newest one, and I haven't had as much time to use it yet. But what makes it interesting is that even though at first glance these appear to be fixed frequency bands, what you can do is you can control click them and they become continuous, which you could never, do on the hardware. That's really cool. So let's hear this one on this source as well. In addition to the frequency being fixed, the gain is also fixed, so it's in 2 decibel increments here. But again, you can change that. Let's hear some of the mid frequencies, hear what that sounds like. So that's the newest addition here, and I really like it. Again, the Custom Series EQ has fewer bands, but they're all voiced really nicely. On the low filter, it's 60, 100, or 200. Low mids, you got 400, 600, or 800. High mids, 2K, 4K, and 7K. And the top end, 10K, 12K, and 15K, as well as a high pass filter and a low pass filter. And I really use this very, very frequently. Let's bypass. Activate. Really can bring things to life. The Custom Series Lift is more of a one-trick pony, but it's a really cool trick what it does. If you're looking to accentuate the top or bottom end of a sound, or maybe you have a particular instrument which occupies the top or bottom end of your mix, this can be a great starting place to really just accentuate that. The low lift has 2 modes, big and punchy. I would say that, to my ear, what I think is happening here is that big is more in the sub frequencies and punchy is in the maybe 1 to 200 hertz range, something like that. And the high lift has present and silky. Similarly, I think the silky is the extreme top end, and present is just more the presence range in the thousands, maybe, I don't know, 7K, 8K, something like that. But let's hear a little bit of that on this piano. Let's start with Silky. Let's try the present setting. And a little goes a long way. That can really get biting and really throw things out of whack if you're not careful. Maybe a little more. And let's try a little bit of punchy here. Big is probably kind of irrelevant on an instrument like this, but let's see what punchy does. It can add a little bit of body. So that is really great, especially I use that sometimes with kick drums or if I have like some percussion on the top end. Now, similarly, the Air EQ, Earth and Air modules do something maybe a little bit similar, but they're really, really powerful. I'm going to demonstrate using the Air module because the Earth isn't really appropriate for this particular track with it being an EP, but let me show you what I mean. I'm going to start cranking this Air knob, and you don't have to go very far before it starts to really sound bright and almost brittle. But that's because it has a second facet here to compensate for that. I'll tell you that in a second. So I've only brought in 5 or 6 dB here, and it's already starting kind of to sound brittle. So let me crank it up. You can really hear how extreme it can go. Yikes, right? But here's where this comes in. This is a high cut. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, if I'm trying to add air, why would I also have a high cut? Well, it goes all the way up to 30K, really supersonic kind of for our ears. And what you do is you combine that by boosting this, which is like a shelf, and then rolling this down, which is like a low pass, until you find just the right amount of your boosting at the right frequencies without too much top end that's cutting. So let me demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to boost more than I might normally by itself. Sounds okay. Now let's roll down the high cut. And that starts to sound nice. I've boosted 7 dB, and then I've brought the high cut down to like almost 18K. And let's A/B that with the original source. Here's dry. EQ. So yeah, these are wonderful if you want to add a little sparkle or some real weight and power to your top and low end. All right, so that was not one EQ at number 2 in my list, but a whole sort of array of EQs. It's a 2-fur, 3-fur, or I guess in this case, it's more like a 7-fur. If you get the Slate VMR, if you get the Slate digital bundle, you get all of these and you can use them as you see fit, but really adds a lot of wonderful retro character, especially the FGS, FGN, and the FGA. All right, and now we have come to number 1, my very favorite EQ plugin. We have already talked about a few that model retro equipment and at least 1 or 2 that also are very modern. So the retro ones were like the Puigtec and the VMR stuff. The Pro EQ stock in Studio One is very modern, and frei raum is about as modern as they come. And this one is also very modern, and it just has all the conveniences and features that you could ever want from a digital EQ. Now, I know a lot of people out there really like Fab filter stuff. The Pro Q2, for example, is a go-to digital EQ for many top mixers, and it is a wonderful EQ. I use Fab filter stuff quite frequently. I use their Saturn saturation plugin, which is killer, and their Pro DS for de-essing is just unrivaled in my mind. But their plugins, as high quality as they are, can be really pricey. And I found an EQ that I love every bit as much as the Pro Q2, and in some ways more because of some of the features it has. And it's kind of a fraction of the price. So this is the MAutoDynamicEQ from MeldaProduction. And MeldaProduction makes, I don't know how many plugins they have. They have just an enormous range of plugins. And the number of features they pack into these plugins is just incredible. So the reason it's called the MAutoDynamicEQ is because in addition to being just a typical EQ with numerous bands, so you've got 7 bands here, but in addition to those, you have a low and a high pass that's not counted among those. So really we're talking like 9 filters here. The filter types that you can choose are just insane. They've got peak, analog peak, band shelves, low and high shelves, resonant shelves, slope for the low and the high, bandpass filter, notch filter, etc., etc. And you can set any of these to be any of those. So right there, it's already an incredibly fully featured EQ. But in addition to that, the auto part here in the title is, and I don't even really use it very much, but you have an automatic equalizer. If you're familiar with isotope ozone, you might know that it's possible to have that EQ in that mastering processor listen to a source and then try to match your material to the source based on the EQ curve. Well, I use that in ozone every once in a while for mastering, but that's a feature here in this plugin as well. Just on a regular, whatever you might want to use it on, you can analyze your target, analyze your source, and it will match as closely as it can. The dynamic part is one that I'm really excited about. So you can take any band, and of course you can take the node, you can crank it, use the wheel to change the Q factor. It's really smooth. You can cut, you can boost, and of course you have controls down here for those as well. Or instead of it just being a static band, you can use this dynamic thing here, and that's this handle. You can have the handle go up or down. And now what you have is not just a static boost or cut, but a dynamic one. So basically, it's going to duck that frequency or boost that frequency whenever it meets a certain threshold. And so it's like if you're familiar with a multi-band compressor, it's kind of like that, but with EQ bands. So you can have a mix and match. You might, boost one band statically because you want it to be really all that way all the time. Or maybe there's a troublesome band, you need to cut it and do it dynamically so it's more transparent. You can do that. Super versatile EQ. And I thought the best way to demonstrate that to you would be on a vocal. So I already went ahead and set up some EQ on this lead vocal here. And you're also going to be able to see as I play this, some of the metering functions, which are really, really cool in this plugin. Let me play back the chorus for you here. I'm going to bypass first so you can just hear it dry.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset and the way you held me close then. Maybe we will both regret the sunset.
So that's just dry. That's just the vocal as it was recorded. Obviously, it's an awesome recording of an awesome performance. This was sung by an incredible singer named Addie Nicole from the band Halocene. I was really honored and thrilled to be able to work with her on this song. And she's a total pro, and so the recording is great, but that's not to say that there weren't some things you could possibly do with EQ. So you might see here now that I have it activated, first things first, you're going to see the analyzer working here.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset.
And I actually have two overlays going here. There's the regular spectrum analyzer.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset.
And that's useful, but then you can also turn on and off this sonogram, which sort of creates a heat map of areas of frequencies that are being, that are part of your audio.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset.
You can have them both on and off at the same time. It's just really excellent. So what have I done here? Let me go ahead and turn off these bands and talk to you about some of the things that I've done. And I tried to use as many of the features as I could on this. So first things first, a little bit of high pass filter here.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset and the way you held me close.
That kind of clears it up a bit. You can change the slope here, of course, to really steep if you wanted to. I used a pretty steep slope here to really cut out the ultimate low end down here because there's not much of that in a female vocal. It's kind of empty down there.
Baby, you can just forget.
So then the next band here, this was to show you the dynamic band. Now, as you can see, this note is sitting right on the flat line here. I haven't boosted or cut, but this handle has been brought down 5 dB. And what that's going to do is, again, dynamically, when there's too much in this frequency at 515 hertz, it's going to duck it. And that just is sort of, it can get rid of some of the boxiness. That's what I was using it for here. So let's listen to that.
Baby, you can just forget
Bypass.
the sunset and the way you held me close then.
Activated.
Maybe we will both regret.
And just that dynamic cut already adds some clarity. But speaking of clarity, let's go ahead and talk about the top end. Now, I wanted to boost some top end, but you're going to notice what happens that I needed to compensate for with another band here as well. So yeah, I put in a shelf at 18K, and I did a pretty extreme boost, 10 dB, but that's okay because it's really high and it just sort of slopes in just gradually a little bit of the nice air there.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset and the way you held me close then.
So that adds nice air, but then what happens is it also accentuates the sibilance, and there are a lot of S's in this song. So you'd use a de-esser ordinarily, but with the MAutoDynamicEQ, you may not have to, because you can take a band, like I did here at almost 9K, and I think I did it pretty broadly, pretty broad band. And what it's going to do is duck up to 6 decibels, but dynamically, like a de-esser would. Here we go.
Baby, you can just forget.
Here's with it out.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset.
Those S's kind of jump out, but now let's put that band in.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset.
Much more manageable. So I've accomplished a lot here. I've used the high pass to roll out the low end, a couple dynamic bands to take out boxiness and some sibilance. I used the top shelf. I also used this soft saturation knob, which is just a wonderful feature. It does what it sounds like. It adds a little bit of harmonic saturation. Let me take it away, and I think you'll miss it, and then I'll roll it back in.
Baby, you can just forget the sunset and the way you held me close then. Maybe we will both regret.
Yeah, it just adds a little bit of excitement to it as you roll it in. It doesn't sound like distortion, of course. It just sounds really energized. A couple other features here that I just want to run down really quickly, and I'm going to miss a lot because this is such a fully featured EQ, but you've got oversampling if you want, up to 4 times. It really does change the sound. So when you use that, I would activate it from the get-go, because you might set up some EQ settings you like and be like, oh, let me turn oversampling on, and it actually can change the sound. Many plugins, EQ plugins and compressor plugins as well, have automatic gain compensation, but I find it really often doesn't work very well. But on this plugin, it really does. So you can boost bands and turn on the automatic gain compensation and AB, and you're in the same range. Speaking of ABing, you have up to not just an A and B, but you have up to 8 different settings you can set up here, and AB among those. So if you really want to experiment, like, should I boost here? Should I boost there? Do different EQ profiles and AB among them. It's really, really powerful. This is just my favorite. It's really my favorite EQ, and that's why it's at number 1 on my list. All right, friends, so there you have it. That is my list of my top 5 favorite EQ plugins for mixing and mastering music with the Go Small. Again, running down from the bottom to the top of the list, we had the runner-up, which is your stock EQ, in my case, Pro EQ in Studio One. You can do a lot with those. Then we have the Manny Marroquin EQ from Waves. We'll use that for adding frequencies a lot. Really wonderful. Then the Puigtec EQs, the push-pull EQs, the classic hardware EQs from Waves also. Then it was the very versatile and unique frei raum, 3 different EQs in one from Sonible. In the number 2 slot, we had the bevy of EQs, retro vintage modeling, as well as new stuff on offer from Slate Digital in the VMR. And finally, at number 1, we had my workhorse powerhouse, does so many different things, the MAutoDynamicEQ from MeldaProduction. I hope that this has been a helpful video if you are a music producer and you work in the box like I do in your home studio or otherwise. EQ is the most powerful tool I believe we have for mixing and mastering music and shaping things to fit together nicely. And I hope that you found some EQs here that might be of interest to you. I'll be sure to put links into the description of this video so you can find those if you're interested in trying them out, demoing them, or picking them up. Also, if you like this video, in addition to leaving a like, which would be great, please feel free to leave a comment below if you have EQ plugins that you like to use. Maybe we can have a conversation and we can share with each other the things that have worked best for us. Otherwise, please feel free to subscribe to the Go Smalls channel if you like this video. I bring out videos like this all the time, talking about Retrowave music production, the songwriting process, the gear I use, and just how to get that sort of retro sound in the modern era from your computer. All right, thanks for tuning in, friends. I hope that you've been enjoying the videos recently. I'm sorry that there was a bit of a gap there in October. I had a lot of personal things keeping me from making videos for the channel, but I'm back now and I have a lot of exciting videos planned for you, so please stay tuned by subscribing. Take it easy and keep it retro. Bye, guys.